live.
Okay.
Hello. Good morning for those of you that are in the United States, and good afternoon for you in France and in Western Europe. We are here today as part of one of our 30 Minutes for Tomorrow events with Mark Jacobson. You're virtually with Léonard, the Innovation and Foresight arm of the Vinci Group. We're based in Paris and have activities spanning across different foresight activities and entrepreneurial activities, with a strong and renewed focus on finding and creating businesses that are going to be taking us in the right direction in terms of where the environment is going, in line with Vinci's goals for the future. Enough for that very quick introduction. I'd like to introduce our guest, Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Guillaume.
Mark Jacobson is the director of the Atmosphère Energy Program and professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University. He's also a senior fellow of the Woods Institute for the Environment and of the Precourt Institute for Energy. He develops and applies computer models to understand air pollution, global warming, and renewable energy resources. He has published 2 textbooks of 2 editions each and 140 peer-reviewed journal articles. He received the 2005 American Meteorological Society Henry G. Houghton Award and the 2013 American Geophysical Union Ascent Award for his work on black carbon climate impacts, and the Global Green Policy Design Award for developing state and country energy plans, which is most of what we're going to be talking about today. He also served as an advisory on an advisory committee to the U.S. Secretary of Energy, and appeared on the David Letterman show to discuss converting the world to clean energy. It also happens that in a previous life, I worked with Mark to help him build one of the first net zero energy homes, which he lives in now, and that I'm sure he's going to be talking about in the talk. So just to bring us into the subject, we're going to talk about Green New Deal roadmaps for 143 countries and how that can be achieved within our lifetime and hopefully shorter than that. One interesting tidbit to bring us into the conversation is we've seen in the news with the impact of the current COVID epidemic that essentially what we're seeing in terms of reduction in air pollution and carbon emissions, a few percentages from our typical growth year on year, is essentially the direction we need to be going when it comes to carbon reduction and air pollution reduction to meet the Paris climate goals. It's pretty obvious for every single one of us that it's not a desirable way to go about it. And one of our hopes is that the plans laid out by Professor Jacobson here are gonna take us on a route that's slightly more interesting and desirable. So I'll leave it to you, Mark, for the rest of this time. And the way we're gonna do it is you are welcome to ask questions in the chat. We'll take those questions at the end, and you'll be able to have an exchange with Mark as we go. So the floor is yours, Mark. I'm going to share my screen, but you can get started.
Thank you, Guillaume. So as Guillaume mentioned, I'm going to talk about roadmaps to transition 143 countries of the world entirely to clean renewable energy. And in fact, these roadmaps can be extended to all around 200 countries. These 143 countries represent about 99.7% of all world emissions, for which we have data available. Next slide, please. So the idea behind these roadmaps is to, first of all, electrify just about everything or provide direct heat for the remainder, and provide the electricity or direct heat with entirely clean renewable energy, namely wind and water and solar power. So for transportation, for example, we'd go to battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. The hydrogen would be primarily for long distance heavy transport, like long distance aircraft and ships, and some long distance trucks and buses and trains. For buildings, we go to electric heat pumps for air heating and water heating and air conditioning, some solar hot water preheating, some geothermal direct heat, some district heating and cooling. For industry, we would electrify all high temperature processes with arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, some dielectric heaters, electron beam heaters. These are all existing technologies. And then we provide the electricity or direct heat for all of these technologies with onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, geothermal, hydroelectric, mostly existing hydroelectric, and small amounts of tidal and wave power. Next slide, please. And so just for example, you all know onshore wind is taken off. The cost is, in the US and many parts of the world, the cost of onshore wind is now the cheapest form of electricity, half the cost of natural gas per unit energy. Solar photovoltaics are also on par or beating wind in some places. Offshore wind, we now have floating offshore wind, which really opens up the door for the huge, large-scale production of offshore wind, especially off in the North America coast, on the east and west coast. They're just huge resources in Europe, Asia as well, Australia, South America too. Floating offshore just really is a game changer, and they're now commercial floating offshore wind. Next slide, please. Solar photovoltaics. Now, you can put solar anywhere. You can put it on water, on lakes, reservoirs, even over the ocean, and you can put it on top of canals, on commercial rooftop buildings, in addition to residential rooftops and in deserts. So the cost of solar PV has dropped precipitously. It's solar and wind, as I mentioned, their costs are so low. The onshore wind and utility solar are so low that they're half the cost of gas in many parts of the world. Next slide, please. For transportation, as I mentioned, we need to electrify or use hydrogen. There are already existing technologies. On the top left is the Tesla semi-electric that has an 850-kilometer range. On the top right is the Nikola Tre's semi-hydrogen fuel cell that goes 1,200 kilometers. So for a longer distance, we're probably going to use hydrogen for up to around 850 to 1,000 kilometers batteries. Ships as well, we're electrifying those. On the bottom left is an electric ferry that exists, and on the bottom right is the electric bus. There are now about 500,000 electric buses in the world. Most of them are in China to date. Next slide, please. And then for aircraft also, there are already efforts to electrify aircraft. On the left is a battery electric aircraft by Ampere. And on the bottom right is an existing hydrogen fuel cell aircraft that seats 4 people, has a 1,500 kilometer range. On the top right is a drawing for a cryogenic hydrogen aircraft. And although that's pretty much, right now we have technologies available for about 95% of the technologies we need to transition all energy, but long distance heavy aircraft probably will take another decade to 15 years to really get off the ground and start to get commercialized. So it's still technically and economically possible to transition even jumbo jets into hydrogen fuel cell aircraft. Next slide, please. And then also for just ordinary appliances, lawn mowers, leaf blowers, forklifts, there are already electric versions. And so these are already serving a benefit to reduce noise pollution and smell pollution, air pollution, health problems. Worldwide, the reason we're really interested in solving these problems is worldwide 7 million people die of air pollution each year, and about 20% of these are children under the age of 5 years old. So we're trying to address not only climate, but also air pollution and energy security, and providing electricity with clean renewable energy does that job. Next slide, please. So we're also going to need storage because the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So we want to start, with electricity storage. We need heat storage, cold storage, and hydrogen storage. So the electricity storage options, there's concentrated solar power with storage. It's, the options of either have solar PV with batteries, or CSP with thermal storage. And right now, PV plus batteries is winning that, but CSP with storage is actually coming down quite a bit in cost. In certain places in the world, there's a lot of CSP with storage going up. Pumped hydroelectric storage is probably the largest existing type of storage in the world, and that's going to continue. There's still options for other locations for pumped hydro. Existing hydroelectric dams are basically big batteries, and the batteries themselves, but then we also have flywheels, compressed air storage, gravitational storage, which I'll discuss in a second. For heating, cooling, there's water tank storage, ice storage, then there's underground thermal energy storage in boreholes, water pits, and aquifers. And those are more for district heating systems, but they are very low cost and very effective in many parts of the world, particularly like in Canada and Northern Europe. And also in building materials, another place to store heat. And then, as I mentioned, hydrogen. Next slide, please. And in terms of like some technologies this is emerging, gravitational storage with solid masses. This is a kind of like pumped hydro, except instead of pumping water up a hill when you have excess electricity, on the left, you're lifting a concrete block when you have excess electricity, then lowering it when you need electricity. And on the right, you're basically pushing a train up a hill that contains a lot of cement or rocks when you have excess electricity, and you let it go down the hill to generate electricity when you need it. And in both cases, the efficiency and cost are similar to pumped hydroelectric, although these have not been commercialized to any great extent, although there are prototypes available now. But this is another option for storage. Next slide, please. In terms of storage, this is a district heating system, 4th generation district heating system at Stanford University, where I teach. And in 2016, 80% of the campus was powered by natural gas cogeneration, electricity plus heat. So 80% of the energy was provided by that. But that natural gas plant was bulldozed and replaced with this 4th generation district heating system, where there are 2 chillers and a boiler. There are thousands of kilometers of piping throughout the campus. And so all the heating and cooling for the campus is now provided by this district heating system that is run on heat pumps primarily, where the electricity is now provided by 2 solar farms, as well as 10 megawatts of solar on campus itself. And so the campus, the 2nd solar farm is being built right now and will be finished in 2021. And so when that occurs, the campus will be 100% renewable electricity, heat, and cooling. The first campus in the world to be 100% for all 3 of those simultaneously. And this is really nice because you basically eliminated gas and replaced it with an efficient district heating and cooling system plus solar electricity for the rest. And anyway, this is an example of what can be done on many university campuses, as well as in small communities as well. Next slide, please. Another example of district heating is this community in Okotoks, Canada, where this is a borehole district heating system, where in 2004 and 5, 52 homes were built, and on the roofs of their garages, solar collectors were placed that in the summer, the solar collectors the heat would be collected in a glycol solution. The glycol solution would be piped to this building on the right, where the heat would be exchanged with water. The water would then be piped under this field, which had been excavated and boreholes drilled to about 30 meters down. And with U-shaped pipes, the water would go down, the hot water would go down, and it would conduct the heat to the soil. And then the cold water would come up, go back to the buildings where there'd be the glycol solution would be reheated. And that heat would be stored 6 months until wintertime, and the whole system run in reverse, and would provide that heat from the borehole field would provide 100% of the heating of these 52 homes when the snow is on the ground, like on the bottom left. And while battery storage is about $200 to $300 a kilowatt hour of storage, this was less than $1 per kilowatt hour thermal of storage. So it's a very inexpensive district heating system and very efficient. And this could be replicated in many places. Next slide, please. There are other types of district heating systems that are existing that can be replicated on large scale, including water pit storage. Here in Vojens, Denmark, you have this kind of looks like a swimming pool. It's filled with water and covered with insulation. And then during the summer, primarily, these solar collectors will send hot water to the pool of water, and that water would be stored, and mostly till winter time, and would provide heating for most of the town nearby. So this is again a district heating system, low cost, very efficient. Next slide, please. Another type of storage is cold storage and ice. Actually, my university, Stanford, had a big ice cube under a building since 1998. And when the electricity price was low at night, electricity was used to produce ice. And then during the day, instead of using electricity for air conditioning, water was run through the coils in the ice and sent to buildings, and that would provide cooling. So it's like ice storage is like electricity storage because you avoid electricity use in the afternoons, except it costs about 1/10 per kilowatt hour compared with electricity storage. So ice storage is used quite a bit in stadiums and hospitals and large complexes, and it's another type of district heating storage system. Next slide, please. And let's look briefly just at transitioning home. So this I want to talk about. Guillaume mentioned that he helped design and construct this home I live in, which is a steel structure home, but it has many energy efficiency measures, and it's net positive in terms of energy. Next slide, please. So I just want to describe some of this system. It has a 13.6 kilowatts of solar on the roof, and there are 4 Tesla wall mount batteries. Each is 3.3 kilowatts and 6.6 kilowatt hours, but only 2 are actually turned on for reasons related to the utility that wouldn't only let me turn 2 on. But that turns out to be fine. So I'm using 2 batteries at a time. Next slide, please. And so then there's there are heat pumps. So there's no gas on the property. Everything is electric. They're electric heat pumps, ductless mini split heat pumps. So that means there are no ducts. The heat pumps they're indoor units they're about 11 scattered around the house in different rooms, and then there are 2 outdoor units. And they basically, heat pumps just exchange heat and cold with the outside air instead of create heat or cold. So they're about 4 times the efficiency as like even an electric resistance heater or a gas heater. So they use like 1/4 the energy as either electric resistance or a gas heater. Next slide, please. And then there's an electric heat pump water heater, which exchanges heat with the room it's sitting in. So the room gets a little bit cooler as the heat is transferred to basically heat the water to a high temperature. But it runs on electricity. It's just like a normal water heater otherwise. Next slide, please. And then for cooking, I use an electric induction cooktop. And electric induction is great because it boils water in half the time as natural gas. It excites molecules. There's electricity that excites molecules in the pot itself, and that heats up the pot. And so the stove itself does not get hot. Excuse me for 1 sec. So don't worry, I don't have a virus. It's a dry cough here. So next slide, please. So just to kind of summarize, so everything is electric. By building the house, I avoided a gas hookup fee of about $5,000 or $6,000, but this shows a range of about $3,000 to $8,000. I avoided the use of gas pipes, which is probably another $4,000 or $5,000, but there's a range of $1,000 to $7,000. I have no electric bill, no natural gas bill, and no vehicle fuel bill. So their cars are electric as well. So it saves $4,000 to $15,000 up front, plus about $3,000 to $10,000 per year for a typical homeowner. Actually, for the last 2 years, I've generated 120% of all my home and vehicle energy use from the solar, no electric bill, gas bill, or gasoline bill. And also the extra electricity is sent to a community choice aggregation utility who paid for the extra electricity, and it received $530 the first year and about $580 the second year. So this whole thing pays itself off in about 5 years or so. There are subsidies. If there were no subsidies, it would be about 10 years. But after that, electricity is free. Okay, next slide, please. So, well, the next question is, can we actually then transition the entire world using these technologies to clean renewable energy for all purposes? So I've developed with a group here plans for 143 countries. And these plans are basically to electrify everything and provide the electricity with clean renewable energy and storage. Next slide, please. And so this summarizes the sum over all 143 countries of the end-use demand, 12.6 terawatts. Sorry, I'm going to need to get some water, so I can hold on 1 sec. Give me 1 second.
I'll use this second to let you guys know that we'll have a networking time available after we ask questions, where each one of you will be able to connect to the other people that joined the conference. So that will be after the Q&A session. You can get back to it, Mark.
Okay, sorry about that. It's really dry throat. So overall, 143 countries, the end-use demand is about 12.6 terawatts in 2016. And this rises to about 20.3 terawatts in 2050 if we go under a business as usual case. If you actually electrify everything and provide the electricity with clean renewable energy, then we go down to about 8.7 terawatts. So we reduce power demand by 57%. And that's because electric vehicles, for example, and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, they're so much more efficient than internal combustion engine vehicles. So averaged over all sectors, we reduce demand 21.7%. The efficiency of electric industry is about 3.4% over business as usual. Heat pumps used for building heating and cooling and water heating, 13.2% efficiency or reduction of energy requirements average over all sectors. And then we eliminate 12% of all energy by eliminating mining, transporting, and refining fossil fuels and uranium, and then 6.6% due to energy efficiency beyond business as usual. So our power demand, end-use demand, goes down 57% without really changing our habits very much. And so we only need 8.7 terawatts instead of 20.3 terawatts in 2050. Next slide, please. And so this kind of shows how the timeline of this progression, this shows from contemporary up to 2050, the top line is business as usual. That's energy power, end-use power demand going up to 20.3 terawatts. Each of those 5 shades of colors going down to the 100% WWS line are those energy efficiency improvements I just mentioned, getting their power demand down to 8.7 terawatts by 2050. And all those then colors below that are how we power that 8.7 terawatts with just wind, water, and solar. And the transition timeline here is 80% by 2030, 100% by 2050. We really need 80% transition of everything by 2030 to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming. We're already at over 1 degree global warming. So this is a rapid transition that needs to occur right away. Next slide, please. And this shows the kind of the mix of energy average over all 143 countries, the one set of mixes. So each country we did a plan for, and this shows the average of how much wind, solar, geothermal, et cetera. So it'd be about 30.5% onshore wind, 14.5% offshore wind, then residential PV, commercial PV, solar PV power plants, 19%, 4% CSP, et cetera. So, 5.7% hydro, but that's all existing hydro. So everything would be wind, water, and solar. Next slide, please. The land area required, we do not need land for offshore wind or tidal or wave. Geothermal is very small. We don't need rooftop solar land. And so we just need land primarily, and there's no new hydro in these plans. So we need land primarily for onshore wind and utility solar and PV and CSP. But the onshore wind land is really spacing area. So it's 0.48% of the world's land to power for the amount of wind we need to power basically the whole world for all purposes. And that's all spacing area that can be used for multiple purposes. Utility PV and CSB is 0.17%, and that's footprint, we call it, that actually can't really be used for anything else. But the total is 0.65%. And for comparison, in the US, it's maybe about 0.9%. In comparison, in the US, 1.3% of all US land area is used by the fossil fuel industry through 1.3 million active oil and gas wells, 1.7 million active oil and gas wells, 2.3 million inactive ones, and the whole fossil fuel infrastructure, mining, refining, gas stations, etc. So we think this will actually reduce land consumption compared with the current fossil fuel industry. Next slide, please. We looked at, can we keep the grid stable with just wind, water, and solar? So we did a study looking in 24 world regions, encompassing all 143 countries, and did a study for 3 years, every 30 seconds, trying to match power demand with supply exactly. And we did that and found that we could match power demand with supply and storage and demand response everywhere in the world at low cost with just wind, water, and solar. So there's a whole study published on this. Next slide, please. This slide kind of summarizes the resulting cost of energy for a stable grid everywhere. Worldwide, it was about 9 cents per kilowatt hour. The capital cost to do this worldwide is about $73 trillion. So this would be the worldwide, effectively, for 143 countries, Green New Deal for 143 countries, $73 trillion up front. For the US, 9.3 cents a kilowatt hour. Capital cost, $7.8 trillion. So it's not like $90 trillion as some people have claimed, or even 15 or 16 trillion. It's about 7.8 trillion to repower the entire US for all purposes, eliminate 78,000 air pollution deaths, eliminate global warming emissions from the US. For China, it's 16.6 trillion up front. Europe, about 6.2 trillion upfront capital costs to do that. Next slide, please. And here's another way to look at the cost. What's the annual energy cost? In 2050, the annual energy cost in a business as usual case is about $17.7 trillion per year. And the health cost of the fossil fuels is another 30 trillion per year. That's the millions of deaths per year and morbidities as well. And then climate costs are another $28 trillion per year in 2050. So total fossil fuel cost of $76 trillion per year. That compares with replacing worldwide business as usual fossil fuels with wind, water, solar. It's about $6.8 trillion per year. So you have a 61.4% reduction of energy cost and a 91% reduction of social costs, energy plus health plus climate costs. It's an incredible savings due to transitioning to 100% clean renewable energy, or in other words, transitioning to Green New Deals worldwide. Next slide, please. And then last, I just want to talk about really briefly policies that have been put in place. There are 61 countries that are now committed to 100% renewable electricity. So not all energy, but just electricity. These are listed here. Next slide, please. In the United States, we have, actually, there have been several bills proposed and resolutions proposed in the House and Senate to go to 100%. There's a House resolution in 2015, Senate resolution in 2016, a Senate bill in 2017, a House bill in 2017, and House bills in 2017 and in 2019. And then the U.S. Green New Deals are the two most recent ones. There are resolutions in the House and Senate to go to 100% renewables. None has been voted on. So there hasn't been progress there, except they've been introduced. Next slide, please. However, there have been many states that have passed laws or executive orders to go to 100% renewable electricity. So Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., Connecticut, Hawaii, California, New Mexico, Washington State, New York, Puerto Rico, Nevada, Maine, Wisconsin, Virginia, and New Jersey have all passed laws to go to 100%. Next slide, please. And moreover, there have been over 140 now, 150 cities and counties that have passed laws or resolutions to go to 100% renewable electricity or all energy in some cases, and these, including many major cities in the blue, but also small ones in places you wouldn't expect in North Carolina, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, in Florida and all over the U.S. There have been laws passed for cities to go to 100%. So this is really working a lot at the state and city level. Next slide. And also companies. There are now, in fact, this is kind of old. This says 221 companies. There are now, I think, over 250 companies that have committed to 100% renewables, including 8 out of the 10 biggest companies in the world, listed in blue. And this is really driving growth of renewable production, renewable like wind farms, solar farms around the world. All these companies that have committed funds to do this. Next slide, please. And then this has also been driven a lot by nonprofits. There are over 100 nonprofits that have committed to 100% renewable energy, trying to encourage policies and to educate the public about this. So I really think that it's really important. This is a multiple-pronged approach. We need people to be aware of what's possible. So educating the public and policymakers is a very crucial part of this transition. And then getting people galvanized and supporting laws and regulations to actually enhance the ability to transition. And this kind of group effort to get people working together has actually been very effective at passing a lot of the laws in the states, the cities, and the countries that are just listed. Next slide, please. Just to summarize then, worldwide, I didn't talk about jobs, but we expect about 28 million more long-term full-time jobs than are lost worldwide. In the US, it's about 3.1 million more jobs than lost. And in Europe, there's, I don't remember the number offhand, but it's over 1 million jobs more produced than lost. We'd require only about 0.65% of the world's land for this transition. We'd avoid 7 million air pollution deaths per year. We think we would slow then reverse global warming because we're basically eliminating all energy-related emissions, which are on the order of 70% of world emissions related to carbon and other global warming agents. We're eliminating about 90% of air pollution deaths. There are additional emissions that have to be reduced from non-energy sources, such as biomass burning, such as halogens, nitrous oxides, methane from agriculture. But this really addresses all energy emissions. We think we can keep the grid stable throughout the world with 100% renewables. Energy costs are 60% less than for fossil fuels. That's absolute energy costs. Energy plus health plus climate costs are 90% less. Next slide, please. And so we really think there's no benefit of not transitioning. There's very little downside, and it's really technically and economically feasible to do this. And really, we really have to overcome the social and political barriers. Here are some websites if you're interested in the actual roadmaps, and their infographic maps at thesolutionsproject.org of each country and state and city transition plan for those. And there's also an online course that is, well, I'm teaching a new online course that will be hopefully available to a large scale. Right now, it's at a Stanford University price, which is not good. But there is a sub course that also is available. It's pretty low cost. But anyway, the purpose is to try to get this information out to the large scale through educating the public and policymakers through papers and through public interactions such as this. So with that, I will stop and try to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you very much.
Okay, so going into the questions, we have quite a few. Okay, here's one. From Jacopo Giola. We have the Stanford heating electricity system. Is it economically competitive with previous all-fossil systems?
I would say yes, definitely in the long term. I mean, the upfront, there's obviously an upfront cost that's huge. But from what I understand, and I don't know that, I mean, if they've done cost analyses, and they would only do this if it penciled out, basically. And so, yes, it is cost effective, especially in the long run, and the system can last a long time. because the components are easy to fix if they break down for the most part. So yes.
We have an interesting question that you often have to answer concerning the resources aspect, Mark. So wind and solar power plants plus storage plus distribution, is there enough resources to do that? And what's the carbon footprint of producing all of that? And how do you take that into account?
Yeah, so we've looked at the resources for solar, for like neodymium for permanent magnets and wind turbine generators. We've looked at steel, iron. There are plenty of resources with solar. There are many different options of types of solar. So even if one resource becomes scarce, certainly there might be recycling needed, but there are many options. So we do not find that there's a resource limitation. There certainly could be slowdowns. Lithium, supplies. If we're starting to produce, millions and millions of cars per year, we need to speed up the extraction of some of these resources. But in the end, like for lithium, we have 1.1 billion cars in the world, and there's enough lithium known resource for 5 billion. Hopefully, we'll never use that many or need that many cars. But I'm just saying that the resource is available. So I don't think that's a limit. But yeah, there could be shortages at certain periods, and that may require either recycling or prices going up for a period before they come down again. Oops, I can't hear you suddenly. Wait, sound went away. Maybe if you send by chat, maybe I can read it. Can you still hear me?
Okay, sorry about that.
There we go.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Question from Mario Hurtado. What has been the reaction that you've had from talks or discussion with oil and gas majors? Do some of them see the transformation as an investment opportunity?
Do oil? Yeah, like definitely a lot of these companies there's a huge amount of money to be made in transitioning to renewable energy because it's a industry that's going to keep growing. I mean, both in generation, storage, transmission, distribution, demand response, appliances, electric appliances. So there's a lot of investment because, this is the wave of the future, and there is a huge investment. Still right now, when renewables are the major source of new energy going up in most places in the world. It's not 100%. We still have gas going up in places and coal even in some places. But people are seeing the writing on the wall, and they are investing in renewables. And so this is a huge, and it's going to be like this for a long time, and because we're only going to go forward from here. So I think, the more people get in front of this, the more they're going to benefit financially from this transition themselves.
Another subject that pops up quite often is, and it's along the line of accepting overgeneration from sources that are by nature intermittent, and it's the role of hydrogen. One question from Ruslan Chochaev is, what are the main challenges for the wide deployment of hydrogen as an energy carrier and as a fuel?
Yeah, so hydrogen will be beneficial in this system primarily for long-distance heavy transport like ships, planes, trucks, buses, long-distance ones. And yeah, so the nice thing about hydrogen is you can store it in a container. And when you have, wind and solar are intermittent by nature. So when you have too much wind and too much solar, right now it's shed a lot. So if instead you can then use that electricity for, when you have too much wind or solar, use it to electrolyze hydrogen, then you can then store that hydrogen and use it for these other for transportation. Now, some people say, well, why would we buy an electrolyzer that we'd only use it a portion of the time? That would be a waste of money because using it 100% of the time. Well, that's actually a very short-sighted view because if you're using, let's say, electrolyzer normally has a lifetime of 15 years. They don't have like long lifetimes normally. It normally has a lifetime of 15 years, but you're only using it I don't know, let's say, just to use a simple number like 50% of the time, that really means it really has a lifetime of now 30 years instead of 15 years. So the economics actually still work out because of the fact that you really can amortize it over a longer period of time because it will not wear out so fast. And so, yeah, from a cost point of view, it's still economical to do. But that's how I see it in this system. That's what I see when you have extra wind or solar, that's when you want to produce hydrogen the most. But you can also produce it other times, depending on if you have a sufficient supply. Because there will be, you do need to overbuild solar and wind in a lot of places, in a lot of cases, in order to make sure you can match the normal electricity demand and supply. And so there will be a lot of times when you have extra electricity, and you can then optimize that system, not only for to produce hydrogen, but you can use the extra also to produce heating for buildings. And for like district heating, like when you can then run a heat pump to produce heat, or hydrogen, or there are a lot of other things you can use extra electricity for.
Thanks, Mark. A question from Dimitrios Kanelopoulos. Hope I said that right. A question about sort of like other researchers, other research teams in the world or in the United States coming up with similar results, and sort of like witnessing convergence in the field when it comes to 100% and sort of wind, water, sun, and this type of approach.
Yeah, there are actually multiple groups that have now been coming to similar results. There, in Finland, there's a group. In Denmark, there's a group. In Australia, there's a group. And then there are lots of individual sporadic studies. We found, in fact, there are 13 independent groups that have come to similar conclusions around the world. And these embody on the order of 50 papers, published papers among 13 independent groups that find that you can go to 100% renewables in different parts of the world and keep the grid stable at low cost. So this is no longer just pie in the sky or just a few people hoping this happens. There's actually something that independently many scientific groups have come to the same conclusion. And so from that, I feel more confident that these results are correct.
And that one I would have been kind of disappointed if no one asked you about it, because we are, after all, I would say broadcasting from France, at least on my side. It's about the role of nuclear in the mix. And so I'm going to read the question, but I think I'd like you to talk about new nuclear and the role of existing nuclear in this discussion. But I'll read Melchior Maniere's question. Do you consider a mix of nuclear plus renewables plus storage? Nuclear clearly has to be a major component of future energy scenarios, low carbon and cheap electricity. The main issue about it is nuclear waste, which can be dealt with the development of the third generation of nuclear turbines.
Yeah, so our plans do not have any nuclear in them, and not because we're against nuclear. It's just, first of all, there is a difference between new nuclear and existing nuclear. I mean, by 2050, pretty much all existing nuclear will be retired, and we think, in fact, existing nuclear, it can stay open except if it requires subsidy. Like in the U.S., there are a lot of plants that are requesting or have received subsidy to stay open. But you can take that, like in New York, 3 upstate New York plants requested and received about $7 billion just to stay open for another 8 years from now. But that you can take that same money and replace the nuclear with clean renewable energy, which you'll have to do in any case. So it's really an opportunity cost to actually use subsidy to keep a nuclear plant open. So in the case where you need subsidy to keep them open, we don't agree with that and think that those plants should be closed and we should go to clean renewable energy. Existing plants that don't require subsidy and don't otherwise pose a danger, sure, let them go until they retire. But in terms of new plants, they take on the order of, every single plant ever built is taken on the order of 10 to 19 years or more between planning and operation. So 15 years is about average. I mean, there's a plant in Finland, there's a plant in France, Flamanville, there's a plant in UK, Hinkley, there's a plant in Georgia, in the US that are being built. All of them are on the order of 15 to 20 years between planning and operation. And so if we plan one plant today, 2020, it won't be ready till at least 2035. And we need 80% transition by 2030. So nuclear cannot play any role in actually helping solve the problem. New nuclear cannot play any role in helping solve the problem. On top of that, the cost is so high. It's 4 to 5 times that per unit energy for a new nuclear plant compared with a new wind or solar farm. So it costs 4 to 5 times to get the same amount of energy, but after it takes 15 years, whereas a new solar or wind farm takes between 2 and 3 years. So we're talking, it's just not even feasible from an economics point of view or from an emissions reduction point of view. And so, why would you spend 4 to 5 times more? That means you're going to get 1/4 for the same cost. You'll get 1/4 to 1/5 the energy output, and you'll get it 12 to 15, 16 years later than you would if you spent that money on renewables. And the problems with nuclear are not just waste. I mean, that's just one problem. Problems are meltdown risk. 1.5% of all reactors ever built have melted down. There's weapons proliferation risk, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says is robust evidence, high agreement that there's a serious weapons proliferation risk with the spread of nuclear energy. There's mining risk. 10% of underground miners for uranium have contracted lung cancer. And there's the waste issue, in addition to all the other stuff that we talked about. So we don't think it's a viable future option, and we really should start focusing on things that actually we know work on a short time scale and that we can deploy quickly, and that's really clean renewable energy and storage.
So I think I'm gonna ask you one last technical question and then opening up. But Mario Hurtado's question is: does your research look at additions or modification to the electric grid itself or other conveyance infrastructure that would be required for the 100% WWS by 2050 goal?
Well, we try to account for the cost of expanding the transmission, especially long distance transmission. We're not modeling the intricacies of the grid individual lines. We're modeling kind of the bulk transmission, but assuming we can build the sufficient transmission, but trying to account for that cost. And we also account for the efficiency losses, the energy losses along transmission lines. So the answer is partly, but not as rigorously as we'd like.
And I guess the very last question second question from Jacopo Giola. Wind, WWS, wind, water, sun looks so evident, so why is not everyone jumping on it?
Well, I would say a lot of people are jumping on it, and it's growing. I mean, it's hard to change an existing infrastructure. If you have existing gas, coal, oil, and infrastructure, one step is you have to get rid of it to replace it with something else. So in terms of new generation, most in the US, for example, 70% of all new generation in the last few years has been wind, water, and solar. But that means 30% is not. So we need to get that number up to 100%. And eventually, if you do that, then, after 20, 30 years, you'll basically have replaced all the existing infrastructure as well. So it's one that's, it's a part, like it took, you can look in history and you have existing infrastructure, and even if something is a good technology, you're not going to just suddenly uproot that existing infrastructure. It'll take time.
Okay, well, I guess that's about it for today. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us, Mark. It was a really exciting presentation. I've seen it a few times, but it's great to see how it's evolving and how the predictions are sort of being met by more and more facts and adoption across the world. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Guillaume. I really appreciate it, and thanks everybody for attending this seminar.
So I'll add, if you want to keep the conversations going, the chat stays open, I believe, but the best place to go to is on your left side. You'll see a networking little handshake. So you can click on that and check it out. It's essentially randomly matching you with other people that are in the assistance. I'm going to head out there. So I'm going to say bye to Mark, and maybe I'll see some of you there.
Okay, thanks, Guillaume.
Bye.
Bye.